The auction yard in Greene County, Iowa, was already loud before the first gavel ever struck. Men stood in clusters near rusted implements, boots pressed into gravel, hands wrapped around paper cups of coffee gone lukewarm in the early autumn air. Engines coughed to life and died again as buyers tested machines they had no intention of purchasing. Laughter drifted between rows of tractors, some polished, some forgotten. Ethan Caldwell arrived later than most. He didn't rush. He never did. His truck rolled in slow, tires crunching over gravel as his eyes scanned the lineup. He wasn't there for something flashy. He didn't care about new paint or modern dashboards. Ethan had built his farm the hard way, acre by acre, repair by repair, and he trusted machines that proved themselves in the field, not in a brochure. Still, even he paused when he saw it. The Massey Ferguson sat near the back row, half hidden behind a newer John Deere and a pair of over-polished Case IH tractors that gleamed under the pale sun. Its red paint had faded into a dull, uneven shade. Rust crept along the edges. One rear tire looked newer than the other, as if it had been replaced without much concern for matching. It didn't look impressive. It didn't look valuable. It looked overlooked. A man nearby snorted when he noticed Ethan looking at it. "You serious?" the man said, nudging his friend. "That thing shouldn't even be here. Scrap yard would have been kinder." The friend chuckled. "Probably seized up inside. Or worse, barely runs." Ethan didn't respond. He just stepped closer. The metal was cold under his hand, but not brittle. He pressed his palm against the hood, feeling, not just looking. The machine carried a quiet kind of weight. Not the heavy, sluggish weight of something dying, but the settled strength of something that had worked hard for a long time. He crouched slightly, eyes narrowing. The hitch assembly was worn, but evenly worn. Not abused. Used. That mattered. "Thing's a joke," another voice called out behind him. "You planning to farm or collect antiques?" Ethan stood slowly, brushing dust off his jeans. "Depends," he said calmly. "Sometimes antiques outlast everything else." That earned a few laughs. The kind that didn't bother him. The auction began soon after. Bidders gathered near the front as the auctioneer's voice cut sharply through the air, fast and rhythmic, numbers flying in a cadence only regulars could truly follow. Equipment rolled forward one by one. Tractors, plows, seeders, each drawing attention, competition, and rising prices. Ethan stayed quiet. He watched. He waited. Machines sold for more than they were worth, driven by pride and ego as much as necessity. A nearly new tractor sparked a bidding war between two neighboring farmers who had a history of trying to outdo each other. The crowd leaned in, energized by it. Ethan leaned back. He had no interest in that game. Then finally, the Massey Ferguson was called forward. There was a noticeable shift. Not excitement. Not competition. Disinterest. The auctioneer's voice didn't change, but the crowd did. Conversations resumed. A few people turned away entirely. One man actually checked his watch. "All right, folks, we got a Massey Ferguson here. Older model, but still standing. Pull start me off." Silence. Then a low, half-hearted bid from someone near the edge, more out of obligation than intent. Ethan raised his hand. The number barely climbed. No one pushed it. No one cared enough to. Within moments, the gavel came down. Sold. And just like that, it was his. A few heads turned, not in admiration, but in mild amusement. "That'll be a fun repair bill," someone muttered. "Or a lesson," another added. Ethan didn't respond. He simply walked over, climbed into the seat, and adjusted himself behind the wheel. The engine took a moment. Then another. A few people smirked, expecting failure. Then, it turned. A low, steady rumble rolled out. Not smooth, not perfect, but strong enough to command attention. Ethan didn't grin. He just listened. Machines spoke, if you knew how to hear them. And this one wasn't done yet. The drive back to his farm took nearly an hour. The Massey Ferguson rode on a flatbed behind him, secured with chains that clinked softly with each turn. The sky stretched wide and open above the Iowa fields, clouds drifting slow like they had nowhere to be. Ethan's farm came into view just before noon. It wasn't the biggest in the county, but it was respected, not because of size, but because of consistency. His fields were clean. His yields were steady. His equipment, while not flashy, was reliable. Or at least, it had been. Lately, things had started slipping. Two of his main tractors had begun struggling under heavier loads. One overheated too easily. The other had lost pulling power after a costly repair that hadn't quite fixed the problem. He needed something dependable. Not perfect, just dependable. The Massey Ferguson rolled off the trailer with a heavy thud, its tires settling into the dirt like it already belonged there. Ethan walked around it once more. No rush. No assumptions. He checked the fluids, inspected the connections, tightened what needed tightening, replaced a worn hose he spotted near the engine. Nothing major. Nothing alarming. That, more than anything, caught his attention. If a machine that old didn't have obvious damage, it meant someone had taken care of it. At least once. By late afternoon, he decided to test it. Not lightly. Not gently. He hitched it to one of his heavier implements, the kind that had been giving his other tractors trouble, and climbed back into the seat. The engine turned easier this time. Stronger. Ethan adjusted the throttle, listening closely as the machine settled into a steady rhythm. Then he eased it forward. The first few feet told him something important. The tractor didn't hesitate, didn't strain. It moved like it understood the work. He pushed it harder. The soil behind him began to break, the implement digging deep as the Massey Ferguson pulled forward with a steady, unbroken force. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Not in doubt. In focus. He adjusted again, more load this time. The engine growled louder, but it didn't falter. Didn't fight. It held. Minutes passed. Then longer. Still no hesitation. Still no weakness. By the time he stopped, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. Ethan shut the engine off and sat there for a moment. Silent. Thinking. The next morning, word had already spread. It always did. By mid-morning, 2 neighboring farmers had stopped by under the casual pretense of just passing through. They leaned on the fence, watching as Ethan prepared the Massey Ferguson again. "That the auction piece?" one of them asked, barely hiding the grin. Ethan nodded. "You actually gonna use it?" the other added. Ethan didn't answer right away. He simply climbed into the seat, started the engine, and drove it straight toward the far field, where the ground was heavier, tougher, and where his other tractors had struggled the most. The 2 men exchanged looks. Amused, skeptical, curious. They followed along the fence line, watching closely now, because whatever happened next would either prove them right or prove something they weren't ready for. And out in the field, as the Massey Ferguson met the heaviest soil on the farm, the engine didn't slow. It didn't choke. It didn't give them the failure they were expecting. Instead, it dug in. The soil in the far field had always been a problem. Heavier, denser, packed down from years of inconsistent moisture and repeated strain. Even Ethan's better machines had struggled there, tires slipping, engines whining, heat climbing too fast. It was the kind of ground that exposed weaknesses quickly, which was exactly why the 2 men stayed at the fence. They expected to see it happen again. Ethan didn't look at them. He didn't need to. His attention stayed on the machine beneath him, the vibration through the seat, the rhythm of the engine, the subtle resistance coming up from the soil through the frame. He lowered the implement deeper. The Massey Ferguson responded immediately, not with a burst, not with a fight, but with something steadier. It leaned into the work. The engine dropped into a lower, stronger tone, like it had found the exact place it needed to be, and held there. The tires gripped without spinning wildly, biting into the earth with a controlled, deliberate traction. Ethan pushed forward. The ground resisted, and the tractor answered. Foot by foot, it pulled through. Behind him, the soil broke clean and deep, more evenly than he had seen in months. No skipping, no shallow patches, no uneven drag, just consistent, solid work. At the fence, the 2 men stopped talking. One of them adjusted his stance slightly, arms crossing now, not casually, but thoughtfully. "That shouldn't be happening," he muttered under his breath. But it was. Ethan reached the midpoint of the field and didn't stop. He turned the tractor smoothly, lined it up again, and went back through, this time pushing harder. More load, more resistance. The Massey Ferguson didn't hesitate. It didn't surge or strain like a machine on the edge of failure. It stayed inside itself, balanced, controlled, almost patient. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning cool. Still, the engine held steady. No overheating, no drop in power, no warning signs. Ethan finally brought the tractor to a stop near the fore end of the field. He shut it off and stepped down slowly, boots hitting the dirt with a soft, grounded thud. He didn't celebrate, didn't smile. He just turned and looked at the field behind him. It was clean, even, finished in a way his other machines hadn't managed in weeks. The two men were already walking toward him now, not laughing anymore. "What did you do to it?" one of them asked, glancing between Ethan and the tractor like there had to be a trick. Ethan shrugged lightly. Nothing it didn't already have. The other man crouched near the rear wheel, inspecting it like he might find some hidden modification. "That doesn't make sense. That thing looked half dead at the auction." Ethan didn't argue. He just walked past them and started checking the hitch again, brushing away dirt with calm, practiced movements. "Most people look at paint," he said after a moment. "Or age. Or how loud something sounds." He tightened a bolt slightly. "Doesn't tell you much." The men exchanged another look. This time, there was no amusement in it, just quiet calculation. Over the next few days, the Massey Ferguson became part of the farm. Not as a backup, not as a gamble, but as a working piece of equipment. Ethan used it where it mattered most, on the heavier sections, under the harder loads, in the places that demanded consistency instead of bursts of power. And every time, it delivered. Word spread further, not in loud announcements, but in the way farmers talk, brief, direct, and usually backed by what they've seen themselves. By the end of the week, more trucks started pulling in. Not to mock, to watch. One afternoon, a man named Carl, known for running one of the larger operations in the county, showed up unannounced. He leaned against his truck, eyes fixed on the field where Ethan was working the Massey Ferguson through another dense stretch of soil. Carl didn't speak until Ethan shut the engine off. "How much you give for it?" he asked. Ethan told him. Carl let out a low breath, shaking his head slightly. "I spent 10 times that last year on a machine that won't pull like that." Ethan didn't respond. Carl stepped closer, running his hand along the side of the tractor, feeling the worn metal the same way Ethan had days earlier. "You selling it?" he asked. Ethan looked at him, not defensive, not amused, just clear. "No." Carl nodded slowly, like he expected that answer. "Figures." There was a pause. Then Carl added, quieter this time, "You knew, didn't you?" Ethan considered that for a second, then shook his head. "No," he said. "I just didn't assume I knew everything about it." Carl let out a small laugh at that. Not mocking, just understanding. By the time harvest season edged closer, the Massey Ferguson had proven itself more than enough. Ethan's other tractors still had their place. He didn't replace them, didn't discard them. But when the work got harder, when the ground turned stubborn or the load pushed heavier than expected, he reached for the one everyone had laughed at. And it never failed him. One evening, as the sun dropped low over the fields, Ethan parked the Massey Ferguson near the barn and shut it down. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the metal settling after another long day. He stayed there for a moment, sitting in the quiet, looking out over the land he'd worked. The rows were straight. The soil was turned right. Everything held together. Not because of one machine, not because of luck, but because he paid attention when others didn't. Because he looked past what something seemed to be, and focused on what it actually was. Across the road, a truck slowed as it passed. The driver glanced over at the field, then at the tractor parked beside the barn. There was no laughter this time. No smirking. Just a brief nod before the truck rolled on. Ethan stepped down from the tractor, boots pressing into the dirt once more. The Massey Ferguson sat behind him, quiet, worn, unremarkable to anyone who didn't understand it. But on his farm, it had already outpulled everything that had ever been doubted. And that was all that mattered.